He got hit, the boy asked the street girl for help. His father was unconscious. If this story caught your interest, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin! On a stuffy autumn afternoon, as the city of Manchester carried on with its routine of car horns and heavy clouds, Michael Alden, just 7 years old, found himself at the center of a whirlwind that would change his life forever. The son of Richard Alden, a renowned tech entrepreneur, the boy never imagined that a simple outing with his father would end in despair. The driver decided to take a shortcut to avoid the heavy traffic in the northern quarter, and as they turned onto a less busy street, something happened. Richard, who was on the phone, abruptly ended the call and slumped over in the back seat, clutching his head. A dull thud filled the car, followed by silence. Within seconds, the nervous and confused driver bolted from the car in search of help, but disappeared down the street. Michael got out of the vehicle, his eyes welling with tears and his heart racing. His father was unconscious, motionless, and the boy didn't know what to do. All he knew was that he had to find someone, fast. Running between puddles and uneven sidewalks, Michael felt the weight of a fear and responsibility too heavy for his small shoulders. The few people who passed him either averted their gaze or quickened their pace, indifferent to his pleas. It was then, near a rubbish bin and partially covered by a torn blanket, that he saw a girl crouching, observing the ground with a strangely serene focus. Dark, tangled hair covered part of her dirty face, but her eyes, when she looked up, were sharp and alert. "Please, help." "My dad, he's passed out in the car. Someone hit him," Michael explained breathlessly, tears streaming down his face. The girl, who he would later learn was named Isabella, stood up without hesitation. There was something in her movements that didn't match her age or appearance. A calm, precise decisiveness. "Take me to him," she said in a firm voice, despite being only 10 or 11 years old. When they reached the spot where Richard had collapsed, Isabella acted swiftly. She examined the superficial wound on his head, checked for signs of breathing, improvised a compress with her own sweatshirt, and told Michael to apply firm pressure. She did it all with surprising ease. "Press here, don't stop. I'm going to get real help," she instructed, before running to the nearest corner. When the paramedics arrived minutes later, guided by a call Isabella had made from a public phone box, they found Richard stabilized and, more importantly, alive. Isabella, however, had already vanished, leaving only a strip of fabric on the ground. Michael held his father's hand, still frightened, but now with a small thread of hope. At St. Mary's Hospital, it took Richard days to fully regain consciousness. The images of that moment came in confusing flashes. He remembered the feeling of the blow of falling and of a child's face taking care of him. The image of the girl wouldn't leave his mind. When his son told him he had been helped by a little homeless girl, something sparked within him. He wanted to find her, to know who she was, why she was on the streets, how she knew what to do in an emergency. "She knew exactly what to do, Dad," Michael would repeat whenever someone expressed doubt. "Just like in the medical shows. She checked your breathing, looked at your eyes. She did everything right." Meanwhile, Detective Rachel Vance, assigned to investigate the incident, began to notice details that didn't fit the initial story. Richard's mobile phone had disappeared, and days later was tracked miles away, showing signs of access to its files. The security cameras on the nearby street had inexplicable failures at the exact time of the incident. Stranger still, a jacket used to staunch Richard's bleeding, brought to the hospital with him, had a tag with the name of an employee from Richard's own company who had been fired months earlier. "Mr. Alden, do you recognize this jacket?" Rachel asked, holding up the item in a plastic evidence bag. Richard frowned, trying to connect the dots. "It's not mine. I didn't have it with me that day. This tag has the name Gregory Miller on it. According to your company's records, he was fired 3 months ago. Can you tell me more about that?" Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. Gregory had been one of Alden Tech's most brilliant developers, but his departure was turbulent after an argument about ethics in an artificial intelligence project. He had accused the company of using algorithms to manipulate personal data for large corporations. Richard had always maintained the project was to improve digital security, not invade privacy. Greg was an idealist, Richard explained, shifting uncomfortably in his hospital bed. He wanted radical changes to the projects, talked about total transparency, but some things just don't work that way in the corporate world. I had to let him go because he started creating a toxic environment. Rachel meticulously noted everything on her tablet, but something in her eyes suggested she wasn't completely convinced. And what about your phone, Mr. Alden? Our tech team detected that it was accessed after the incident. Specific files were viewed. What kind of files? Mainly those related to the Sentinel project. Richard turned pale. The Sentinel project was the heart of Alden Tech, a public security system in its testing phase in partnership with the Manchester City Council. The system connected cameras, sensors, and databases to create a real-time map of the city, supposedly to prevent disasters, manage traffic, and assist in emergencies. But there were controversies about the true scope and purpose of the technology. While the adults tried to piece together the puzzle, Isabella watched them from a distance. For the next few nights, she slept near the hospital, making sure Richard was okay. She felt somehow responsible for him, as if they had formed an invisible bond on that street. But the fear was constant. She had been hiding for months, running from something she didn't fully understand but knew was dangerous. Isabella Shaw was the daughter of a paramedic who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Mark Shaw worked for the NHS ambulance service in Manchester, and during a night shift 8 months ago, had simply vanished. The ambulance was found empty, its equipment in disarray with no signs of a struggle. The authorities classified it as desertion of post, suggesting Mark might have run off due to personal problems. But Isabella knew the truth. Her father would never abandon a patient or his daughter. Since then, she had survived on the streets, guided by her father's teachings and a silent goal, to gather proof of what really happened that night. Isabella kept secrets. In a small teddy bear she carried in her backpack was a USB drive with files, photos, and recordings she had collected during furtive visits to places linked to her past. Among them were camera images, showing suspicious meetings between public figures and men in suits, names that appeared on city council contracts, official vehicles in unlikely places. Slowly, the puzzle was also coming together for her, and part of that puzzle pointed directly to Richard's company. But something didn't make sense. She had believed the entrepreneur might be involved, until the moment she saw him fallen, vulnerable, and later in the hospital, searching for answers just like her. On the third night after the incident, as Isabella prepared to sleep on a bench near the hospital, she sensed a presence behind her. She turned quickly, ready to run, but relaxed when she saw it was only Michael, Richard's son. "How did you find me here?" she asked, suspicious. "I saw you from my dad's window. You're here every day," Michael answered with childlike simplicity. "Why did you disappear that day?" "The police wanted to talk to you. You're like a hero." Isabella smiled faintly, perhaps her first genuine smile in months. "I'm not a hero. I just did what my dad taught me." "Is your dad a doctor?" "A paramedic. He saved people every day." Michael noted the use of the past tense but didn't comment. "My dad wants to meet you. He wants to thank you. Could you come with me now?" Isabella hesitated. She wanted to see Richard, to ask about the Sentinel project, about Gregory Miller, about the contracts with the city council, but she knew it was risky. If someone saw her, if they found out she had the USB drive— "I can't right now," she finally replied. "But tell your dad I'm keeping an eye on him." Michael frowned, confused. "Is that a threat?" "No," Isabella smiled again. "It's a promise. I'll be back tomorrow." By the big tree near the entrance, midday. Before Michael could say anything more, Isabella disappeared into the shadows, as agile as a cat. The boy returned to his father's room with a racing heart, feeling like part of a grand adventure. The next morning, Richard was visited by Amanda Fisher, his business partner and COO of Alden Tech. Tall, with dark skin and a commanding presence, Amanda carried a folder with urgent documents and worrying news. "The investors are getting restless, Richard. With you in the hospital and the rumors about the attack, the shares have dropped 15%. We need a statement from you, something to calm the market." Richard signed the documents distractedly, his mind elsewhere. "Amanda, do you remember Greg? The developer we fired at the beginning of the year?" She hesitated for a moment, adjusting her red-framed glasses. "Of course. Brilliant but problematic. Why?" "The jacket used to stop my bleeding had his name tag on it." Amanda became visibly tense. "That doesn't make sense. He hasn't worked for us in months." "Exactly. and Detective Vance said my phone was accessed after the attack. Files from the Sentinel project were opened. Amanda moved away from the bed, walking to the window. Outside, the city pulsed under a cloudy sky. Richard, I think I need to tell you something. 2 weeks ago, Greg came to see me. He said he'd discovered something about Sentinel, something that wasn't in the official reports. I thought it was just another one of his conspiracy theories, but now... Why didn't you tell me? Richard asked, feeling a pang of betrayal. Because he asked for secrecy, and because... Well, you've always been inflexible when it comes to Sentinel. It's your pet project. I know how defensive you get. Richard was about to retort but was interrupted by Michael entering the room. The boy seemed anxious, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Dad, it's almost time. Midday! Time for what, son? Percy, the girl who helped you. She's going to meet us at the big tree by the entrance. She promised. Richard and Amanda exchanged surprised glances. Michael, you found the homeless girl? Richard asked, trying to get up with difficulty. Not exactly. She kind of found me. Or maybe she was watching me. Anyway, she's coming today. But it has to be you, Dad. She wants to talk to you. Determined not to miss this chance, Richard asked Amanda to get a wheelchair. There was no time to lose. Meanwhile, in her office at the police station, Detective Rachel Vance received an unexpected visitor. Edward Campbell, Manchester's Secretary of Public Safety, entered the room with an authoritarian air. Detective Vance, I hear you're investigating the Alden case. How are we progressing? Rachel raised an eyebrow. It wasn't common for a city secretary to take an interest in a seemingly simple assault case. We're following the leads. Mr. Campbell, there are inconsistencies we're clearing up. I see, he replied, sitting down uninvited. You know this case could have political implications. Richard Alden is an important partner of the City Council. The Sentinel project represents the future of public safety in our city. I'm aware of that. In fact, we discovered that Sentinel data may have been accessed after the attack. Edward adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. That is concerning, but I'm sure it's just a coincidence. In any case, I came to offer additional resources. Consider my department at your disposal. Thank you, but we have everything under control, Rachel replied firmly. However, there is something you could clarify. According to the system's logs, your official car was seen near Alden Tech at 10:47 p.m. yesterday. That's not on your official schedule. Edward stood up abruptly, his face hardening. Are you monitoring me, Detective? Just doing my job. You know, Sentinel logs all official vehicles. It's one of the system's marvels, isn't it? Thus, I have commitments that don't appear on official schedules, and I suggest you focus on the Alden case without unnecessary detours. Have a good day. After Edward's tense departure, Rachel leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. Something didn't smell right about this whole story, and she was determined to find out what it was. At the hospital, Richard, supported by Amanda, made his way to the meeting point with Michael. The boy ran ahead, eager to introduce his father to his mysterious savior. Under the leafy tree near the entrance, there was no one. Michael looked around, disappointed. She promised, Dad, she said midday. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Maybe she's running late. Or maybe she got scared. She's not afraid of anything, Michael replied, convinced. She'll come. I know she will. Amanda checked her watch. We have that video conference with the investors in 20 minutes, Richard. You can go, a child's voice said from behind them. Meetings are important. The three of them turned to find Isabella, who had appeared as if from nowhere. She was cleaner than the night before, wearing an oversized t-shirt and faded jeans. Her dark hair was pulled back in a makeshift ponytail, revealing a thin face and intensely observant eyes. You came, Michael exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. I promised, didn't I? She replied, her eyes fixed on Richard. You're looking better. Richard stared at the girl, moved. Thanks to you. Michael told me how quickly you acted, how you knew exactly what to do. I owe you my life. Isabella shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't, Richard insisted. People walked right past my son as he begged for help. You stopped. You helped. A moment of silence fell between them, broken by Amanda, who stepped forward with her hand extended. I'm Amanda Fisher, Richard's partner. It's a pleasure to meet the hero everyone's been looking for. Isabella hesitated before shaking the offered hand. Something about Amanda's posture made her suspicious. "I'm not a hero and I don't want to be looked for." "Where do you live, Isabella?" Michael asked innocently. The simple question brought tension to the girl's face. "Around." Richard noticed her discomfort and intervened. "Isabella, I know we've only just formally met, but I want to help. I can offer you a place to stay, food, clothes. It's the least I can do." "I don't need charity," she replied defensively. "It's not charity. There's gratitude." Isabella seemed to consider the offer, looking back and forth between Richard and Amanda. Finally, her eyes landed on Michael, who was staring at her with genuine admiration. "There is something you can do for me," she said at last. "Tell me what the Sentinel Project is." The question caught Richard by surprise. How did a homeless girl know about a confidential project at his company? "How do you know that name?" he asked cautiously. Isabella smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I have my ways. Let's make a deal. You tell me about Sentinel and I'll tell you how your phone ended up miles away after the attack." Amanda stepped forward, clearly alarmed. "Richard, we need to go back to the room." "The conference—" "It can wait," Richard interrupted her, his eyes still on Isabella. "I think we have more important matters to discuss." Just then, Michael spotted a black car screeching to a halt across the street. Two men got out looking directly at the group under the tree. "Dad," Michael called, pointing discreetly. Isabella followed the boy's gaze and immediately tensed up. "I have to go," she said quickly. "They can't see me." "Who are they?" Richard asked, trying to get a better look. "The same ones who attacked you. The same ones who took my dad." Before Richard could process what she had said, Isabella was already running in the opposite direction. Michael made a move to follow her, but Amanda held him back. "Stay here," Richard ordered, trying to get out of the wheelchair. "I'm going after her." "You can barely walk," Amanda protested, but it was too late. Richard was already on his feet, stumbling in the direction Isabella had gone, leaving Amanda and Michael behind, under the watchful eyes of the mysterious men who, noticing the movement, also began to approach. The chase had begun, and no one knew for sure who was the prey and who was the hunter in the dangerous game unfolding on the streets of Manchester. Richard ran clumsily through the outer corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, still feeling the effects of the medication and his time in bed. Every step was painful, but determination drove him. He couldn't lose sight of Isabella. The girl who had saved his life was now fleeing, as if her own existence was at risk, and perhaps it was. Her words echoed in his mind. "The same ones who attacked you. The same ones who took my dad." Turning a corner, Richard spotted Isabella slipping between two parked cars. She was small and agile, used to escaping, to becoming invisible when necessary. But Richard wouldn't give up so easily. "Isabella," he called out, breathless. "Wait, I can help you." The girl stopped for a moment, turning with wide eyes. "Go back to the hospital," she hissed. "They'll see you." "Who are they, Isabella? Explain what's happening." Isabella hesitated, torn between flight and the possibility of finally having an ally. Behind Richard, the men in suits were closing in fast. "No time," she exclaimed, running to Richard and pulling him by the hand. "Come with me." Together, they ran down a side alley away from the hospital. Isabella led the way with the confidence of someone who knew every nook, every shortcut in the city. Richard could barely keep up, but adrenaline suppressed the pain and fatigue. After a few minutes that felt like hours, they reached an old, abandoned warehouse near the train station. Isabella slid through an opening in the fence and helped Richard do the same. "It's safe here, for now," she said, as they crossed the space filled with rusty machinery to a remote corner where there were signs of occupation. A makeshift mattress, a few boxes of belongings, carefully stacked books. "Is this where you live?" Richard asked, looking at the place with a mix of admiration and sadness. "One of the places," Isabella replied cautiously. "I don't stay in one spot for long." Richard sat down on the mattress, exhausted. The effort had been too much for his still recovering body. Isabella noticed and immediately fetched a bottle of water from her backpack. "Drink," she ordered, handing him the bottle. "You shouldn't have run like that." Richard accepted the water, touched by the girl's concern. "Thank you. For this and for saving my life that day." Isabella sat across from him, cross-legged, her expression serious. "Now tell me, what is the Sentinel Project?" Richard sighed, wondering where to begin. "It's an urban security system. It uses artificial intelligence to monitor the city through cameras, sensors, and databases. The idea is to predict accidents, optimize traffic, and assist civil defense. And spy on people, Isabella completed, with a wisdom beyond her years. Richard frowned. It's not for spying. It's for public safety. Then why did my dad disappear after seeing something on the Sentinel cameras? The question landed like a bomb between them. Richard sat up straighter, his throat suddenly dry again. Your dad. You said they took him. Who is your father, Isabella? Mark Shaw, an NHS paramedic. He disappeared 8 months ago during a night call. She picked up the small teddy bear from her backpack and hugged it to her chest. The authorities say he deserted his post, but he would never do that. My dad was too dedicated. He taught me everything I know about first aid. And you think his disappearance is related to the Sentinel project? I don't think. I know. Isabella opened a secret pocket in the teddy bear and pulled out a USB drive. He left this hidden in our house before he disappeared. It has files, photos, coordinates. And your company's name appears several times. Richard reached for it, but Isabella pulled back. I don't fully trust you yet, she admitted. But I need to know, are you involved in what happened to my dad? Richard felt the weight of the accusation. In the last few days, his world had been turned upside down. First the attack, then the discoveries about unauthorized access to his files, Greg's jacket, and now an orphaned girl connecting him to a mysterious disappearance. Isabella, I swear on my son's life I don't know what happened to your father, but I'm starting to suspect that something very wrong is happening at my company, something I'm unaware of. He paused, organizing his thoughts. You said your father saw something on the Sentinel cameras. What exactly? Isabella hesitated, weighing whether to reveal everything she knew. He worked night shifts. One night, he was called to an accident on Deansgate near the City Council building. The call came through the new system, integrated with Sentinel. When he got there, there was no accident, but the ambulance's dash cam recorded something. My dad called me that night, agitated. He said he had seen the truth about the project, that it wasn't what it seemed. He said he was going to get concrete proof and would come back for me. We needed to leave the city, he said. And he never came back, Richard concluded, a tightness in his chest. The next day, men in suits came to our house. They turned everything upside down. But I had already left. I only took this teddy bear and some clothes. I've been living on the streets ever since, trying to understand what happened. Richard absorbed the story in silence, connecting the dots with his own recent experience. The men at the hospital. Did you recognize them? Not specifically, but the way they dress, the way they act. They're the same type of people who came looking for me after my dad disappeared. A metallic clang from the other side of the warehouse made them both jump. We need to go, Isabella whispered, already packing her few belongings into her backpack. They never searched the same place for long, but it's better not to risk it. Come with me, Isabella, Richard proposed suddenly. To my house. You'll be safe there. You still don't get it, do you? Nowhere is safe. They have access to everything through Sentinel. So what do you suggest? The girl thought for a moment as she finished packing her bag. I need to show you something first. Then we'll decide. Together they left the warehouse through a different exit, careful not to be seen. Richard sent a quick message to Amanda, just saying he was fine and would be in touch soon. He turned off his phone's GPS at Isabella's suggestion. Where are we going? He asked as they followed secondary streets. To where it all began, the site of the fake accident. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Amanda was trying to calm Michael, assuring him that his father was fine and would be back soon. But inside she was furious. Richard had disappeared with a homeless girl, leaving her to deal with nervous investors and a multi-million-pound project at risk. To make matters worse, the two mysterious men had approached, identifying themselves as security agents from the City Council. Mrs. Fisher, I'm Charles Roche, Special Security for Secretary Edward Campbell. We're looking for Richard Alden. It's urgent. Amanda maintained the professional composure that defined her. Mr. Alden had a personal emergency. Can I help you with something? The man exchanged a look with his partner. And the girl who was with you? Who was she? An admirer, Amanda replied promptly. She heard about the accident and came to bring flowers. Charles seemed skeptical, but didn't press the issue. When Mr. Alden returns, Please ask him to contact us immediately. Secretary Campbell has urgent matters to discuss regarding the Sentinel project. Certainly. After the men left, Michael tugged on the sleeve of Amanda's blazer. Aunt Amanda, are those men bad guys? Isabella was scared of them. Amanda crouched down to the boy's level. Michael, sometimes grown-ups have complicated disagreements that seem scary to children. But don't worry. Your dad knows how to take care of himself. Isabella does too, Michael replied with conviction. She's very smart. Amanda smiled, trying to hide her concern. I'm sure she is. Now let's go back to the room and wait for your dad, okay? As they walked back, Amanda checked her phone, reading Richard's message. She immediately called Detective Rachel Vance. Detective! It's Amanda Fisher. We need to talk about Richard Alden and a certain homeless girl. At the station, Rachel was deep in research on the Sentinel project when she received the call. After listening to Amanda, she decided it was time to intensify the investigation. I'm sending a car to pick you up at the hospital, Mrs. Fisher. Bring Richard's son, too. You'll be safer here. Hanging up the phone, Rachel turned her attention back to her computer. On the screen was an old incident report. The disappearance of Mark Shaw, an NHS paramedic. The case had been closed as desertion of post, but certain inconsistencies stood out, especially the mention of an 11-year-old daughter, Isabella Shaw, who had also disappeared on the same date. Detective? A young officer called from the door. I found what you asked for. NHS ambulance service call logs from the night Mark Shaw disappeared, and the call to Deansgate doesn't exist in the official records. But I found something in the backups. It was manually entered into the system and then deleted. And you know where the command came from? A terminal at the city council. Rachel felt a chill. The pieces were starting to fit. Find out everything you can about Edward Campbell. Contracts, bank transactions, official and unofficial schedules. And don't mention this to anyone. Absolutely no one. Across town, Richard and Isabella arrived at Deansgate, near the city council building. The area was bustling, as one would expect from one of Manchester's main thoroughfares. This was it? Richard asked, looking around. Doesn't seem like a good place for an ambush. That's why they chose it. Too many witnesses means no reliable witnesses. Isabella pointed to a pole with a security camera. That's part of Sentinel, isn't it? Richard nodded. Can you access it? See what it recorded that night? Not from a phone. I'd need to be at a secure terminal at Alden Tech. Isabella thought for a moment. I know someone else who might be able to help. She hesitated, unsure if she should share more information. Greg? Richard's eyes widened. Gregory Miller, my former employee. He's been helping me. He's the one who taught me how to identify the Sentinel cameras, how to avoid them. Where is he now? In hiding, like me. Like everyone who knows too much about the project. Richard ran a hand over his face, trying to process everything. Isabella, I need you to trust me. Take me to Greg. If he has information about what's happening, we need to join forces. The girl looked at the entrepreneur with a mix of hope and suspicion. What if it's a trap? What if you're part of all this? Think about it. If I were part of it, why would they have attacked me? Why would they have stolen my phone and accessed project files? Isabella considered the argument. Maybe to create a cover, to make you look like a victim too. Or maybe, Richard continued, I'm exactly what I seem to be. Someone who created something with good intentions that is now being used for dark purposes, without my knowledge or consent. A moment of silence followed as Isabella weighed her options. All right, she finally decided. I'll take you to him. But if this is a trick, it's not, Richard assured her. I want to find the truth as much as you do. They walked for about 20 minutes, moving away from the city centre towards a more modest residential neighbourhood. Isabella led the way confidently, occasionally glancing back to make sure they weren't being followed. Richard, still weak, struggled to keep pace. This is it, Isabella said at last, stopping in front of a small middle-class apartment building. Second floor, apartment 204. They climbed the stairs in silence. Isabella knocked on the door in a specific sequence. 3 quick knocks, a pause, 2 slow knocks. Footsteps were heard on the other side, followed by the sound of several locks being undone. The door opened just enough to reveal a bearded face and suspicious eyes. Isabella. What? Why did you bring him here? Greg's voice was a mixture of surprise and indignation. He wants to help. Greg, I think he really doesn't know what's going on. Greg opened the door wider, revealing a simple apartment completely taken over by electronic equipment. Monitors, home servers, wires everywhere. Come in, Richard. But just so you know, if this is some kind of trap, I have a panic button that will wipe all the data instantly. Richard entered, taking in what looked like a makeshift command center. Greg, what is all this? My personal resistance against the big brother you created. Greg closed the door, locking all the deadbolts. Welcome to the rabbit hole, boss. Greg's apartment was a technological labyrinth. On the walls, maps of Manchester were covered in markings, photos connected by colored yarn, and printouts of code and documents. On a central desk, 6 monitors displayed different feeds, security cameras, real-time data analysis, and lines of code being processed. You hacked Sentinel? Richard asked, both impressed and horrified. It's not hacking when you helped build the system, Greg replied, sitting down in front of the monitors. Let's just say I left a few backdoors open before I was let go. Isabella went to the fridge and got a bottle of water, offering it to Richard. Greg found me 2 months after my dad disappeared. He was investigating anomalies in the Sentinel system and came across my dad's case. Greg typed rapidly on one of the keyboards as he spoke. Sentinel isn't just a security system, Richard. It's a mass surveillance tool. It can identify faces, track movements, cross-reference data from phones, social media, credit cards, all in the name of public safety. That's not true, Richard protested. The system was designed with ethical safeguards. There are oversight committees, access limitations. How naive, Greg shook his head. As soon as you handed the system over to the city council, they changed the protocols. They removed the safeguards one by one. And you know who oversaw those changes? Edward Campbell. Richard's stomach sank. Edward Campbell, the Secretary of Public Safety, had been one of the Sentinel Project's biggest supporters from the beginning. He had been crucial in convincing the mayor and the city council to invest millions in the system. Isabella told me about her father. What exactly did Mark Shaw see that night? Greg swiveled in his chair to face Richard. He saw Edward Campbell and some local businessmen making an exchange in the middle of the night. Briefcases changing hands, documents being signed. Nothing explicitly criminal, but extremely suspicious for 3 in the morning in an isolated spot. Greg pointed to one of the monitors, which showed a grainy image. The NHS ambulance's dashcam caught part of the scene. We don't recognize all the faces, but one of them was you, Richard, Isabella completed, her eyes accusatory, or at least someone who looked a lot like you. Richard felt as though he'd taken another blow to the head. That's impossible. I would never be part of something like that. Are you sure? Greg asked, zooming in on the image. Because the resemblance is striking. Richard moved closer to the monitor, studying the figure. The man did look like him. Same height, same haircut, similar posture. But there was something in his movements, the way he gestured. It's not me, he stated with conviction. But I recognize those gestures. My God, it's George. George? Isabella asked, confused. George Alden, my older brother. Greg and Isabella exchanged surprised looks. You never mentioned a brother when you were at the company, Greg commented. We grew apart years ago. He went into politics, I went into tech. We have irreconcilable differences. Richard continued to stare at the image, stunned. But why would he be involved in this? And why would someone attack me if he was the target? Maybe you weren't the target, Greg suggested. Maybe they wanted your phone specifically. To access Sentinel from the inside, with your credentials. Richard considered the theory. It made sense. We need more proof. These images are too grainy to incriminate anyone. I agree, Greg said, typing again. That's why I've been trying to access the Sentinel system backups from that night. If we can get the original footage from the street cameras. You won't be able to, Richard interrupted. The backups are stored on isolated servers with maximum security protocols. You're underestimating my skills, boss. No, I'm just stating a fact. You designed part of those protocols yourself, remember? They're impenetrable remotely. Greg stopped typing, frustrated. So what do you suggest? That we physically break into the Alden Tech servers? A thoughtful silence filled the room. Richard looked at Isabella, who was intently studying the map on the wall. We don't need to break in, Richard said finally. I'm still the owner of the company. I can access everything legitimately. They'll never let you, Greg countered. If Edward Campbell is involved, you'll be stopped the moment you set foot in the company. Not if I have a good reason to be there. A reason no one would question. Richard turned to Isabella. What if I organized an event to thank the girl who saved my life? A press conference at the company headquarters, with all the local media present. Isabella's eyes widened. I don't want to be in the media. You won't have to be. We'll announce the event, create all the buzz, but you'll never show up. It will just be a distraction while Greg and I access the servers. Greg stroked his beard, considering the idea. It's risky, but it could work. He turned back to the monitors. We'd only need access to the backup servers for a few minutes. With your authorization, I can extract what we need quickly. And then, Isabella asked. Then we expose everything, Richard replied. If my brother and Edward Campbell are involved in something illegal using my technology, they need to be held accountable. It won't be that simple, Greg warned. We're talking about powerful people, with connections at every level. If cornered, they could become even more dangerous. They're already dangerous, Isabella retorted, with a firmness surprising for her age. My father has been missing for 8 months. I'm living on the streets on the run. Richard almost died. We can't just let them continue. Richard nodded, admiring the girl's courage. Isabella is right. We need to act. Just then, Richard's phone vibrated. A message from Amanda. I'm at the station with Michael and Detective Vance. You need to come now. It's about Sentinel. Richard showed the message to the others. Detective Vance is investigating the case. Maybe she's found something. Or maybe it's a trap, Greg argued. Amanda wouldn't put Michael in danger, Richard countered. If they're at the police station, it must be safe. Isabella came closer, looking intently at Richard. Do you trust this detective? So far, she seems to be the only authority asking genuine questions about what happened. And this Amanda? Do you trust her completely? Richard hesitated for a moment, thinking about the conversation they'd had at the hospital, about Greg contacting Amanda before the attack. She's been my partner for years. She's never given me a reason to doubt her. Until she hid from you that I approached her with concerns about Sentinel, Greg reminded him. That was a lapse in judgment on her part, Richard tried to justify, but the doubt had already been sown. Isabella grabbed her backpack and the teddy bear. Let's go to this police station, but let's be careful. I can't show up there, Greg protested. I'm considered a hacker wanted by the cybercrime unit. Then you stay, Richard decided. Keep trying to access what you can remotely. We'll be in touch. Before they left, Greg handed Richard a small device, a signal scrambler. It'll prevent them from tracking your phone accurately. And Isabella. He crouched down to the girl's level. Remember what I taught you. Observe before you trust. She nodded seriously. Always. Richard and Isabella left the apartment, taking alternative routes to avoid the main security cameras. The police station was about 20 minutes away. On the way, Richard tried to call Amanda, but the call went straight to voicemail. That's strange, he commented, worried. She never turns off her phone. Isabella remained vigilant, watching every movement around them. What are you going to tell the detective about me? The truth. That you saved me, that your father is missing, and that we have reason to believe it's all connected to the Sentinel project. What if she's involved too? Richard didn't have an answer for that. The trust that had once come so naturally to him was now completely shattered. Who could he really trust? His company, his project, his own brother, everything was in question. As they approached the station, they noticed an unusual amount of activity. Police cars were coming and going at a rapid pace. Journalists were crowded at the entrance. Something big is happening, Richard muttered. A nearby reporter was speaking to a camera, following allegations of irregularities in public contracts. Secretary of Public Safety Edward Campbell has been called in for questioning. Sources indicate that compromising documents were delivered to the police by an anonymous source. Richard and Isabella exchanged a look. Greg, they both said at the same time. He must have leaked some of the information he had, Richard concluded. This changes everything, Isabella observed. If Edward Campbell is under investigation, it might be safer for us to go in, or more dangerous. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. As they were deciding what to do, Richard spotted Amanda leaving the station with Michael. His son looked frightened. clinging to Amanda's hand as she looked anxiously in all directions. "Amanda!" Richard called, quickening his pace towards them. Seeing him, Michael let go of Amanda and ran to his father. "Dad, Aunt Amanda said you were in danger, and the police lady said we need to go somewhere safe." Richard hugged his son, a wave of relief washing over him at seeing him safe. "Where is Detective Vance?" he asked Amanda. "Inside, coordinating the operation. Edward Campbell is giving a statement." Amanda looked at Isabella with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "I see you found your savior." Isabella stayed partially hidden behind Richard, suspicious. "We need to talk to the detective," Richard decided. "There's no time," Amanda replied urgently. "The detective instructed me to take you and Michael to a safe location immediately. She'll meet us there later." "What location?" "A police safe house." "I've already called a car." Richard hesitated, feeling Isabella's tension behind him. "What about Isabella?" "She's coming with us." Amanda glanced briefly at the girl. "Of course. You all need protection now." A black car pulled up, stopping at the curb. The driver rolled down the window. It was one of the men who had appeared at the hospital. "It's him," Isabella whispered, tugging on Richard's shirt. "One of the men who followed us." Richard instinctively stepped back, pulling Michael closer. "Amanda, that's not a police officer." Amanda seemed genuinely confused. "He's the security the detective assigned to escort us." "Charles Roche." "He's not police security," Isabella insisted. "He works for Edward Campbell." At that moment, Charles's expression hardened. He opened the car door quickly, revealing a discreet handgun. "Get in the car, now, all of you." "No fuss." Amanda turned pale, finally realizing the danger. What's happening?" "Ask your boss," Charles replied coldly. "Now get in." Richard positioned Michael and Isabella behind him, shielding them with his own body. "We're not going anywhere with you." Charles took a step forward, his hand firm on the gun, ready to force them if necessary. But then an authoritative voice rang out from behind them. "Police! Freeze! Drop the weapon!" It was Detective Rachel Vance, flanked by 2 officers, all with their guns aimed at Charles. The man hesitated, calculating his chances. "You don't know what you're getting into, Detective," he growled. "I know perfectly well," Rachel replied, not lowering her weapon. "Charles Roche, you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping and involvement in the disappearance of Mark Shaw." Isabella's eyes widened at the mention of her father's name. Charles, seeing he was cornered, made a desperate decision. He dove into the car and sped off, weaving through the chaotic traffic. "Damn it," Rachel swore, lowering her gun. "Seal off the area. I want roadblocks on all routes out of the city." As the officers dispersed to follow her orders, Rachel approached the group. "Is everyone all right?" Richard, still holding Michael and Isabella, nodded. "Detective, how did you know?" "I received an anonymous tip. A distorted voice told me about the kidnapping attempt." She looked at Isabella. "And you must be Isabella Shaw. I've been looking for you for days." Isabella shrank back, suspicious. "How do you know my name?" "I reopened your father's case, Mark Shaw. The evidence suggests he didn't desert his post as was initially reported." Rachel knelt down to the girl's level. "And now, with what we've discovered about the Sentinel Project, we're beginning to understand what really happened that night." Isabella exchanged a look with Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "I have proof," she said finally. "In my teddy bear." Rachel looked at the worn-out toy in the girl's hands. "Then let's go to the station. All of you." She shot a firm glance at Amanda, who looked completely stunned. "And you, Mrs. Fisher, have a lot of explaining to do." As they walked towards the station entrance, protected by police, Richard realized this was just the beginning of a long battle. Edward Campbell, his brother George, the suspicious contracts, the fate of Mark Shaw. There was so much still to uncover. But for the first time in days, he felt he wasn't alone in this search for the truth. With Isabella, Greg, Rachel, and even his young son Michael, who had shown surprising courage, maybe there was a chance to unveil the true face of the Sentinel Project before it was too late. What none of them noticed, however, was that they were being watched. From a nearby building, a figure observed everything through powerful binoculars. Upon seeing the group enter the police station, the figure took out a mobile phone and dialed a number. "They're with the police now." The girl, too. The voice was calm, professional. "Yes, sir, understood. We're moving to Plan B." The man hung up, put the binoculars in a briefcase, and calmly left the location. The real hunt was just beginning. In the interrogation room at the station, Detective Rachel Vance organized the information Isabella had just shared. The contents of the USB drive hidden in the teddy bear were staggering. Photos, documents, coordinates, records of clandestine meetings, emails exchanged between city council employees and local businessmen. It all pointed to a complex scheme of bid rigging and inflated contracts, with the Sentinel project at its core. "Your father was very careful," Rachel commented, impressed by the meticulous records. "How did he manage to gather all this?" Isabella held a cup of hot chocolate that a kind officer had offered her. She seemed more relaxed now, though she still maintained the alert posture she had developed during her months on the streets. Dad was always detail-oriented. He was a paramedic, but he also had a background in IT. When he started noticing strange patterns in the emergency calls coming through the Sentinel integrated system, he began documenting everything. Richard, sitting beside the girl, listened intently. Michael had fallen asleep in an adjacent room, exhausted after the emotional roller coaster. "And when exactly did your father realize something was wrong?" Rachel asked. "After the Sentinel system was implemented in the emergency services, he noticed some calls would appear and disappear from the system, always at specific times and in strategic locations around the city." Isabella paused, remembering. "One night, he got a call for an accident near the city council. When he got there, there was no accident. But the ambulance's dashcam recorded a meeting between people who shouldn't have been there at that hour." Richard nodded, connecting the dots. "And one of those people looked a lot like me." "Your brother," Rachel corrected, showing an enlarged photo from the recording. "George Alden, current Municipal Secretary of Administration. We checked the records and indeed he was present that night, along with Edward Campbell and 3 other local businessmen." "What exactly were they doing?" Richard questioned, still trying to process the idea of his own brother being involved in something so dark. "From what we can determine, they were exchanging documents related to the expansion of the Sentinel project. Contracts that never went through public bidding." Rachel slid some papers across the table. "Your company was the original developer of the system, but these subsidiaries, all shell companies, by the way, received millions for upgrades and expansions that don't appear in any official documents." Richard examined the papers. "Incredulous. I never authorized this. These companies have no connection to Alden Tech." "Not officially," Rachel agreed. "But if you follow the money, they all lead to offshore accounts controlled by George Alden and Edward Campbell." Isabella, who had been watching the exchange with sharp eyes, interrupted. "But what happened to my dad? Why did he disappear?" Rachel sighed, her face softening as she addressed the girl. "We believe Mark saw something he shouldn't have that night, something beyond a simple exchange of documents. And from what we know now, it probably has to do with a secret feature of Sentinel." "What feature?" Richard asked, tense. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and Amanda was escorted in by an officer. She looked haggard, her eyes red from recent crying. "Ask her," Rachel suggested, gesturing towards Amanda. Amanda sat down heavily in the available chair, avoiding Richard's accusing gaze. "I didn't know everything," she began, her voice trembling. "I swear I didn't. When George approached me 6 months ago, he said the government wanted to enhance the monitoring system to combat drug trafficking. He asked for absolute secrecy, citing national security concerns. I believed him." "What enhancements exactly?" Rachel pressed. "A behavioral prediction algorithm. It would be able to identify suspicious patterns before any crime even happened." Amanda ran a hand through her hair, messing up her usually impeccable hairstyle. "They wanted to implement it without going through the normal ethical approval process and without Richard's knowledge." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "You betrayed my trust." "Amanda, how could you do this behind my back?" "It was a lapse in judgment," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I only realized what was really happening after your attack. When I tried to question George about it, he threatened me. He said I was in too deep to turn back." Rachel made some notes on her tablet before continuing. "What we've discovered is that this so-called prediction algorithm is nothing more than a system to monitor political opponents, activists, investigative journalists, anyone who could threaten the city council's schemes, including curious paramedics who see things they shouldn't. Isabella shrank in her chair, hugging the teddy bear tightly. Did they do something to my dad? Is he... We don't have that confirmation. Rachel interrupted gently, placing a hand on the girls. In fact, we have reason to believe your father may be alive. Isabella's eyes lit up. Alive? How do you know? An anonymous informant, we believe it's Gregory Miller, though he denies it when asked, sent us records of a clandestine detention center on the outskirts of the city. Among the detainees, there's a man matching Mark Shaw's description. Isabella shot up from her seat, knocking over the empty cup. We have to go there. Now, it's not that simple, Rachel explained calmly. The place is heavily guarded, with private security. We need a warrant and a coordinated operation. We're working on it, but it takes time. My dad might not have that time. Isabella protested, tears welling in her eyes for the first time since Richard had met her. Richard stood up and placed his hands on the girl's shoulders. We're going to find him, Isabella. I promise. But we need to do this the right way so no one else gets hurt. The girl looked at him, conflict visible on her face. You don't understand. He's been there for 8 months, alone thinking he was abandoned. Richard's phone vibrated. A message from Greg. Got access to the backup service. Found something big. Come to the apartment now. He showed the message to Rachel, who frowned. I don't like the idea of you leaving the station. We still haven't located Charles Roche, and Edward Campbell was released after questioning due to a lack of concrete evidence. But Greg might have found that evidence, Richard argued. If he managed to access the original Sentinel backups, he could have direct proof of their involvement. Rachel considered for a moment. All right, but you'll go with a police escort, and I want you to stay in constant contact. What about Michael? Richard asked, concerned. He stays here where it's safer. We have a rest area where he can keep sleeping. With an officer on duty. Richard nodded, reluctant to leave his son but understanding the necessity. Amanda comes with us, he decided, to everyone's surprise. If she really wants to redeem herself, this is her chance to help. Amanda looked up, a mix of gratitude and determination in her eyes. I'll do whatever it takes. 20 minutes later, Richard, Isabella, Amanda, and 2 plainclothes officers arrived at the building where Greg was hiding. The street was unusually quiet for that time of night, which immediately put everyone on alert. Something's not right, one of the officers muttered, his hand instinctively going to the gun hidden under his jacket. As they approached the building, they noticed the front door was ajar. Richard exchanged a worried look with Isabella, who already looked ready to run up the stairs. Wait here, one of the officers instructed, cautiously entering the building. Tense minutes passed until the officer returned, his expression grave. Apartment 204 is empty. Signs of a hasty departure, but no apparent violence. He ran, Isabella concluded. He must have realized he was being watched. Or he was tipped off, Amanda suggested. Greg always had contacts within the cybercrime unit. Richard didn't seem convinced. He wouldn't run without telling us. Not after calling us with such urgency. He took out his phone and called Greg. The call went straight to voicemail. Something is wrong. Let's check the apartment, the second officer decided. The group went up the stairs in silence. The door to 204 was unlocked, which in itself was unusual for someone as paranoid as Greg. Inside, the electronic equipment was still there. Some monitors still on, but there was no sign of its owner. Look. Isabella pointed to one of the monitors which displayed a message. Server 7, Folder R Backup, File Sentinel Override XE. Richard approached the computer. It's an instruction. He wanted us to find this. It could be a trap, Amanda warned. Or it could be exactly what Greg discovered before he disappeared. Richard countered, sitting down and starting to navigate the system. While Richard worked, Isabella explored the apartment, looking for any clue as to what might have happened. In a corner, she noticed a phone that had fallen behind a shelf. It was Greg's, with the battery partially removed. Richard, look at this. She handed him the device, which Richard quickly reconnected. On the screen was an unsent text message. They found out. Building not safe. Going to point B, file shows MS location. MS, Mark Shaw, Isabella exclaimed. He found where my dad is. Richard turned his attention back to the computer with renewed urgency. After several minutes of navigating the servers, he found the mentioned file. It was an executable program, password protected. I need the password, he muttered, frustrated. Isabella studied the screen for a moment, then looked around the apartment. Her eyes landed on a framed photo, a younger Greg alongside Richard, at the inauguration of Alden Tech. Try Alden 2017, she suggested. It's the date on the photo there. Richard typed it in, but it didn't work. We need to think like Greg. What would be significant to him? Amanda, who had been analyzing the papers scattered on the desk, held up a document. Here, the date he was fired. The report is marked .0. Richard tried .0 as the password. The screen flickered, and the program began to load. Maps of the city appeared, with colored dots moving in real time. It's Sentinel in action, Richard explained. We're seeing the city's real-time monitoring. How does this help us find my dad? Isabella questioned, impatient. Richard continued to navigate the program until he found a function labeled Restricted Areas. Here, Sentinel was programmed to ignore certain areas of the city, literally blind spots in the system. A different map appeared showing 7 locations marked in red. Each had an associated code. They're government facilities, one of the officers suggested. Prisons, military bases, national security areas. No, Richard corrected. I know these locations. None of them are official facilities. This one here, for example, is an old abandoned distribution center in the industrial district. Isabella pointed to one of the spots on the map. This one is near where my dad disappeared, less than 2 kilometers from the site of the fake accident. Amanda moved closer, studying the map intently. And this one is owned by the Alden Foundation. The Alden Foundation? Richard repeated, confused. My company doesn't have a foundation. Not yours, Amanda clarified. Your brother's. George started the Alden Foundation for social projects about 2 years ago. It was mainly to improve his public image before he went into politics. Richard felt a chill, and one of the foundation's properties is a blind spot in Sentinel. He zoomed in on the map. It's an old sports complex in the Northern District, supposedly under renovation to become a community center. That never opened, Amanda completed, despite the millions invested. Isabella slammed her hand on the table, resolute. That's where my dad is. I'm sure of it. The officers exchanged worried glances. We need to inform Detective Vance, one of them said, pulling out his phone. This changes everything. There's no time, Isabella protested. If they found out Greg accessed this information, they could be moving my dad right now. Or worse, Richard added grimly. The tension in the air was palpable. The officers spoke quickly with Rachel on the phone, explaining the discovery. Richard continued to explore the program, trying to find more information. There's something strange here, he muttered. The system shows intense activity at that sports complex in the last 2 hours. Vehicles coming and going. They're clearing the place out, Amanda concluded. Destroying evidence. Isabella grabbed Richard's arm, desperate. We have to go now. Please. Richard looked at the girl, then at the officers still on the phone. He made a decision. Let's go. The officers can meet us there with backup. Richard, that's insane, Amanda tried to argue. We could be walking straight into a trap. It's also insane to let them remove all the evidence, he countered, determined. If my brother and Campbell are really behind this, they have the power to cover it all up. We need to act now. One of the officers covered the phone with his hand. Detective Vance is organizing a raid. She's asking us to wait for backup. How long? Richard asked. At least 40 minutes. Richard shook his head. Too long. We'll head over there now and observe from a distance. If we see any suspicious movement, you'll radio the detective immediately. The officers seemed uncomfortable with the idea, but recognized the urgency of the situation. All right, but we stick to observation only. No heroics. Richard nodded, though he knew that if he saw a chance to rescue Isabella's father, he wouldn't hesitate to act. He looked at the girl, who displayed a mix of fear and determination. We're going to find him, he promised. Tonight. 20 minutes later, 2 cars parked discreetly about 200 meters from the old Alden Foundation sports complex. From the outside, the complex did indeed look like it was under construction, with hoardings and restricted area signs everywhere. But the amount of private security was disproportionate for a simple renovation. 3 guards at the main gate, one of the officers observed, using binoculars, and cameras all around the perimeter. There's movement at the back, Amanda pointed out. Large vehicles, they look like lorries. Richard was trying to find a better angle to observe when he noticed a familiar car parked near a side entrance. That car. It's George's. Isabella, who hadn't taken her eyes off the borrowed binoculars, gasped. There are people coming out of that door. They're carrying something, or someone. Indeed, two figures were carrying what looked like a weakened person. The man was semi-conscious, his head lolling, his feet dragging on the ground. It's him, Isabella exclaimed, nearly jumping out of the car. It's my dad! I'm sure of it. Richard grabbed her arm, stopping her from doing anything impulsive. Wait, we have to do this right. But they're going to take him away, she protested, tears in her eyes. The officers were already relaying the situation to Rachel, requesting authorization to act. The response came quickly. Back up en route, maintain position. No more time, Richard decided, seeing that Mark was being put into a van. We're moving closer. Maybe we can delay their departure until backup arrives. How? Amanda asked skeptically. Richard thought quickly. George doesn't know we're here. I can use that to our advantage. He took out his phone and dialed his brother's number. After 3 rings, a cautious voice answered. Richard. What is it? I know what you're doing, George, Richard said. Watching through the binoculars as his brother exited the building, phone to his ear. I know about the sports complex, about the detainees, about Sentinel. A tense silence on the other end of the line. I have no idea what you're talking about, brother. I'm at home working. I'm looking at you right now, Richard countered. By the way, that blue tie doesn't go with your grey suit. George visibly froze, looking around, trying to locate the source of the call. What do you want, Richard? I want you to release Mark Shaw and everyone else you're holding illegally. I want you to return control of Sentinel to my company, where I can ensure it's used ethically. And I want you and Edward Campbell to turn yourselves into the authorities. A dry laugh came from the other side. Always the idealist, aren't you? Always the perfect brother, the ethical entrepreneur, the misunderstood genius. George sounded genuinely bitter. You know what your problem is, Richard. You never saw the real potential of what you created. Sentinel can transform this city, this country. Into an authoritarian surveillance state? Richard questioned. That's not what I designed it for. No, you designed it to win innovation awards and appear in tech magazines. I saw its true potential. Absolute control. Information is power, brother. And we have all the information. Richard felt a chill as he realized the extent of his brother's corruption. The police are on their way, George. You'd better surrender. George laughed again. By then we'll be long gone, just like your little hacker friend. Richard's heart skipped a beat. What did you do to Greg? Let's just say he's reconsidering his choices in a more restrictive environment. You're not getting away with this, Richard guaranteed. We have proof. Documents, recordings, witnesses. A homeless girl and an entrepreneur who's barely recovered from an accident? George scoffed. Don't make me laugh. You have nothing concrete. We have Sentinel, Richard retorted. Your secret algorithm, its blind spots, everything. Greg managed to access the original backups before you got to him. That seemed to shake George. He gestured furiously to the men around him, speeding up the evacuation process. You're bluffing. Why don't you ask Edward Campbell? By the way, how did he react to being called in for questioning today? I imagine not very well. George signaled to someone out of Richard's line of sight. This conversation is over. Enjoy your last moments of freedom, brother. The call ended. Immediately, the complex's security doubled, with armed men taking up strategic positions around the perimeter. What did you do? One of the officers asked, alarmed. He knows we're here. Not exactly. He knows I'm watching, but not from where. Richard turned to Isabella. I bought us time. They're nervous now, making mistakes. And backup is on the way. Suddenly, Amanda pointed to movement on the south flank of the complex. There. It's Greg! Indeed, a slender, bearded figure was moving stealthily between the warehouses, taking advantage of the confusion to infiltrate. Greg was alive and apparently had a plan. He's going to try to rescue my dad, Isabella concluded, hopeful. The next few minutes were tense. Everyone watched intently, trying to track both Greg's movements and the evacuation process that George was commanding. Mark Shaw had already been placed in the van, which now waited with its engine running. Backup is 5 minutes out, one of the officers reported. That's not going to be fast enough, Richard noted, seeing the van preparing to leave. We need to act now. We can't, the officer insisted. Those are armed men, Richard. This is a job for the tactical team. It was then that they saw Greg make his move. Somehow he had positioned himself near the vehicles and, in a swift motion, threw something under the van carrying Mark. Seconds later, the vehicle died, lights flashing on the dashboard. Portable EMP, Richard muttered, impressed. He disabled the vehicle's electronics. The confusion was immediate. The guard started shouting orders, running to check what had happened. George gestured furiously, clearly realizing his plan was falling apart. Now, Richard decided. While they're distracted. Without waiting for approval, he got out of the car and began to approach stealthily, staying in the shadows. Isabella followed him instantly, ignoring the whispered protests from Amanda and the officers. Stay close to me, Richard instructed as they advanced. We're going to get to your dad. About 50 meters away, they could see Greg in action. Taking advantage of the chaos, he had neutralized 2 guards and was now trying to open the van's door. George, however, noticed the movement and pulled out a gun, aiming it at Greg. Freeze, he shouted. Step away from the vehicle now. Greg froze, his hands in the air. It's over, George, he said, surprisingly calm. The police are coming. The whole scheme has been exposed. You've lost. George laughed, a cold, calculating laugh. Not yet, you third-rate hacker. I still have a few cards up my sleeve. It was then that Richard decided to reveal his presence. He's right, George. It's over. George spun around abruptly, the gun now aimed at his brother. Richard, always meddling, aren't you? Always trying to save the world. He gestured with the gun. Come on, join our little party. Richard took a step forward, placing himself between George and Greg. Put the gun down. You're not a killer. You don't know me as well as you think, little brother. George seemed strangely calm now. You know, I really admired you. Your talent, your vision. That's why I wanted to use your creation for something truly impactful. Spying on people? Imprisoning innocents? Order, control. You created the perfect tool to shape society, Richard. And you didn't even realize it. While he kept George distracted, Richard saw out of the corner of his eye that Greg was discreetly getting back to work on the van door. Isabella, taking advantage of the situation, slipped through the shadows, approaching the vehicle from the opposite side. Sentinel was never designed for mass surveillance, Richard argued, trying to buy time. It was meant to save lives, not control them. A distinction without a difference, George retorted. Every system of protection involves some level of control. At that moment, Isabella managed to open the back door of the van. Inside she found her father, semi-conscious but alive, her eyes filled with tears. Dad, she whispered, gently touching his face. Mark Shaw, thin and frail after months of captivity, slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize his own daughter. Then his eyes lit up. Bella? He murmured, using the nickname only he used. Is it really you? Isabella nodded, crying silently. I'm getting you out of here. Dad, hang on. Meanwhile, the tension between the Alden brothers escalated. You attacked me. Your own brother, Richard accused. You sent men to assault me in the street while my son watched. George had the decency to look slightly ashamed. A tactical error. We just wanted your phone, your credentials. No one was supposed to get hurt. And why did you need my credentials? You already had Amanda working for you. Amanda was useful but limited. We needed full access to the system's core, something only you had. Just then, sirens began to wail in the distance. The backup was arriving. George looked around nervously, realizing his time was running out. It seems our conversation will have to be postponed, he said, backing towards another vehicle. But this isn't over, Richard. Sentinel is bigger than both of us now. You're not going anywhere, Richard declared, stepping forward. Don't be a fool, George warned, pointing the gun directly at his brother's chest. That's when Isabella came into view, supporting her stumbling father. George, momentarily distracted, shifted the gun in their direction. No! Richard shouted, lunging at his brother. The two fell to the ground, struggling for control of the gun. Greg ran to help Isabella and Mark get away. The chaos was total, with guards running in every direction, some fleeing at the sound of the sirens, others trying to control the situation. In the middle of the struggle, the gun went off. The sound echoed through the complex, freezing everyone for an instant. Richard felt a warmth spread across his shoulder, followed by intense pain. George, seizing the moment, pushed him aside and got to his feet. "You always think you're so noble," George spat, looking down at his wounded brother. "But in the end, what did you achieve? A gunshot wound and a clear conscience? What's that worth when you have no real power?" Sirens and flashing lights now flooded the perimeter. Police cars blocked all exits. George, realizing he was trapped, took one last look at his fallen brother. "This isn't over," he promised, before running towards one of the warehouses. Richard, clutching his wounded shoulder, tried to get up. He felt arms supporting him. It was Greg. "Stay still," the former employee instructed. "The bullet grazed you, but you're losing blood." "George," Richard murmured. "The police will get him," Greg assured him. "Right now we need to take care of you." In the distance, Richard saw Isabella hugging her father, both of them crying. Despite the pain, he felt a wave of relief. At least they had achieved that. A paramedic, a father, reunited with his daughter after 8 months of forced separation. Detective Rachel Vance coordinated the entry of the tactical teams, who quickly took control of the complex. Officers arrested guards and staff, while others searched the warehouses for George and any other detainees. Amanda approached Richard, her eyes wide at the sight of the blood on his shirt. "My God." "Richard, I'm fine," he assured her, though the pallor on his face said otherwise. "How's Michael?" "Safe at the station. An officer is with him." She knelt beside him, tears in her eyes. "Forgive me, Richard. I should have told you everything from the beginning." Richard watched her for a long moment. "Why, Amanda? Why did you betray my trust?" She looked down, ashamed. "At first I really believed it was for the greater good. George talked about public safety, about saving lives. Later, he knew things about my past, had information that could destroy me. I was a coward." Richard nodded, too tired for judgment. "We all make mistakes. What's important is how we fix them." Paramedics approached to treat Richard. As he was being placed on a stretcher, he saw Rachel approaching with a grave expression. "George Alden escaped," she informed him. "He used some kind of underground passage that wasn't on the blueprints. But we got Edward Campbell and 3 other accomplices." "And the other detainees?" Richard asked. "We found 7 people held in makeshift cells, all with the same profile. Professionals who had somehow crossed paths with Sentinel's operations. Journalists, technicians, a tax auditor." Richard closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of responsibility. "All of this happened because of my creation." "No," Rachel corrected firmly. "It happened because people like your brother and Campbell twisted something good for their own nefarious purposes. The blame lies with them, not you." Richard wasn't entirely convinced, but he nodded anyway. He saw Isabella approaching, still hand in hand with her father, who was being supported by a paramedic. "Thank you," the girl said simply, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I should be thanking you," Richard replied. "You saved my life on that street, remember? We're even." Mark Shaw, though visibly weak, extended a hand to shake Richard's. "You brought my daughter back to me. I can never repay you for that." Richard shook the man's hand, feeling a deep connection with this paramedic, who, like him, had been a victim of a conspiracy larger than them both. "What happens now?" Isabella asked, looking at Rachel. The detective placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Your dad is going to the hospital to get proper care. You can stay with him. In the meantime, we continue the investigation. George Alden won't be on the run for long." As he was being loaded into the ambulance, Richard surveyed the scene around him. Police leading away handcuffed suspects, forensic technicians collecting evidence, paramedics attending to the rescued detainees. The Sentinel Project, his creation, his legacy, had been corrupted and used for evil. But now he had a chance to fix it, to redefine his original vision. Greg approached the ambulance before the doors closed. "I'm heading to the station to give a formal statement," he informed him. "I'll tell them everything about the unauthorized modifications to the system." "And after that?" Richard asked. Greg smiled faintly. "After that, if you'll still have me at the company, we can work together to rebuild Sentinel." "The right way this time." Richard nodded, extending his uninjured hand. "Partners?" "Partners," Greg agreed, shaking the offered hand. The ambulance doors closed and Richard lay back on the stretcher, exhausted. There was still so much to do. George was still at large, The Sentinel system needed a complete overhaul, and public trust in Alden Tech was shattered. But for the first time in days, he felt he was on the right path. As the ambulance pulled away, Richard saw Isabella getting into another medical vehicle with her father. The homeless girl who had saved him had found her way back home. And in a way, he was finding his too. What no one noticed, however, was the shadowy figure watching everything from a distance. George Alden, hidden in an unmarked vehicle, was typing furiously on a tablet. On the screen, a simple command: Phoenix Protocol initiate. Seconds later, on servers scattered across the city, the code for Sentinel began to silently replicate itself, preparing to rise again in a new form. The battle was over. But the war for control of Manchester's most powerful technology was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the operation that dismantled part of the scheme behind the Sentinel project. The headlines in the Manchester newspapers gradually faded, replaced by new scandals, new dramas. The city, as always, moved on, caught between convenient forgetting and constant reinvention. At St. Mary's Hospital, Richard Alden was finishing another physical therapy session. The wound in his shoulder had healed well, but it still required regular exercises to regain full mobility. The physical pain, however, was the least of his worries. "How are we today, Mr. Alden?" asked Dr. Paula, the therapist who had been with him from the start. "Better," Richard replied, moving his shoulder in cautious circles. "Almost no pain. Excellent progress. 2 more weeks and we can end the sessions." Richard thanked her and prepared to leave. In the hallway, he found Michael waiting patiently, reading a science magazine. "All done, Dad?" the boy asked, putting the magazine in his backpack. "Yep, champ. We can go." Together, they left the hospital and got into the car where Greg was waiting. Since the events of that night at the Alden Foundation Sports Complex, Greg had become not just an ally, but a close friend and protector of the Alden family. "All set for the meeting?" Greg asked, pulling the car into traffic. "Yes, Rachel confirmed she'll be there at 3. Mark and Isabella, too." Richard checked his watch. "We have time to drop Michael at his mum's place first." In the back seat, Michael swung his legs, clearly restless. "Dad, you promise you'll tell me everything afterwards?" "About what you guys decide about Sentinel." Richard smiled at his son in the rearview mirror. "I promise. After all, you're as much a part of this story as any of us." After dropping Michael off at his ex-wife's house, they headed to the redesigned headquarters of Alden Tech. The building was the same, but everything inside had changed. New security protocols, a new executive team, new ethical guidelines. The company had undergone a complete transformation, just like its founder. In the main conference room, Detective Rachel Vance was already waiting, accompanied by Mark Shaw and Isabella. The girl, now living with her father again in an apartment temporarily provided by Alden Tech, looked like a completely different person. Healthier, with well-kept hair and age-appropriate clothes, but her eyes remained the same, observant, alert, impossible to deceive. "Good afternoon, everyone," Richard greeted, shaking each of their hands. "Thanks for coming." "We wouldn't miss it for anything," Mark replied. The paramedic had recovered physically, though he still bore the psychological scars of his captivity. After extensive testimony to the authorities, he had been instrumental in incriminating Edward Campbell and others involved in the scheme. Everyone sat around the oval table. Greg connected his laptop to the projector, displaying the new logo for the Sentinel Project 2.0. "Before we begin," Rachel intervened, "I have some updates on the investigation." All eyes turned to the detective, eager for news. "Edward Campbell has been formally charged by the Crown Prosecution Service. In addition to kidnapping and false imprisonment, he will face charges of conspiracy, bribery, and misuse of public funds. The estimated sentence is over 30 years. And my brother?" Richard asked, his expression hardening. "George Alden is still at large. We believe he left the country using false documents. Interpol has issued a red notice, but so far no concrete leads." Richard nodded, trying to hide the mix of anger and sadness he felt whenever his brother was mentioned. "What about Amanda?" Greg questioned. "Plea bargain," Rachel explained. "In exchange for detailed information about the scheme and the names of everyone involved, she'll receive a reduced sentence. She'll likely serve time in an open prison." Richard didn't comment. His relationship with Amanda, both professional and personal, was over. The betrayal had been too deep to forgive, though he recognized the value of her cooperation with the justice system. "Well, let's get to why we're here today." Richard redirected the conversation, gesturing to the presentation Greg had prepared. The future of the Sentinel project. Greg took over, clicking to the next slide. As you all know, the original system was compromised and in many ways corrupted. For the past 3 months, our team has worked to rebuild it from scratch with new ethical parameters and independent oversight. Images of the new system appeared on the screen. More transparent interfaces, open source code for public auditing, oversight committees composed of representatives from civil society. Sentinel 2.0 won't just be an urban monitoring system, Greg continued. It will be a truly democratic public safety platform. Cameras and sensors will only be activated in public areas, with clear notices to the public. No personal data will be stored without explicit consent. And most importantly, Richard added, control will not be in the hands of a single entity. The City Council, the police, non-governmental organizations, and universities will have equal and supervised access. Rachel studied the slides with a professional eye. It sounds promising, but how can you guarantee it won't be manipulated again? That another Edward Campbell or George Alden won't find a way to twist the system for their own benefit. Radical transparency, Greg answered promptly. All the code will be available for public review. Any changes to the system will need to be approved by an independent ethics board. Furthermore, Richard added, we are implementing what we're calling the Isabella Protocol. The girl, who had been observing quietly until now, widened her eyes, surprised to hear her name. Isabella Protocol? She repeated, confused. Richard smiled at her. Yes, a system to watch the watchers. Inspired by your courage and determination to seek the truth, even when everything seemed to be against you. Isabella blushed slightly, unaccustomed to praise. How does it work? Mark asked, placing a proud hand on his daughter's shoulder. Greg took over the explanation. Ordinary citizens like Isabella will be able to anonymously report any suspicious use of the system. These reports will be analyzed by an independent committee with the power to temporarily suspend access for any entity, including government bodies, to Sentinel. Rachel nodded, impressed. Ambitious and necessary. But do you believe the City Council will accept these conditions? They have no choice, Richard answered firmly. The scandal caused severe damage to the municipal administration's image. They need a public gesture of commitment to transparency. Besides, Alden Tech still owns the rights to the base technology. If they don't accept our terms, we simply won't provide the system. The conversation continued for another hour, with everyone contributing ideas and concerns. Isabella, initially shy, gradually became involved, offering surprisingly mature perspectives on privacy and security. Her experience on the streets had given her a unique understanding of surveillance and its impact on the most vulnerable populations. By the end of the meeting, a consensus had been reached. Sentinel 2.0 would be implemented in phases, starting with a pilot project in limited areas of the city, always with full transparency and community participation. I think we have a solid plan, Richard concluded as Greg turned off the projector. Thank you all for your contributions. As the participants began to disperse, Richard asked Isabella and Mark to stay behind. I have something specific for you, he said once they were alone. Any more surprises with my name on them? Isabella joked, now more at ease with Richard. In a way. Richard pulled a folder from a drawer. As you know, Alden Tech has taken responsibility for helping you get back on your feet. The temporary apartment is just the beginning. Mark looked uncomfortable. Richard, we've talked about this. I appreciate everything you've done for us, but I don't want charity. It's not charity, Mark, it's reparation. Richard opened the folder, revealing documents. The company caused damage to your life and Isabella's, even if indirectly. I have a moral obligation to correct that. Dad and I are fine, Isabella intervened. He's already got a new job at the hospital, and I'm back in school. We don't need... Please, Richard interrupted her gently. At least hear my proposal. Father and daughter exchanged hesitant glances but nodded. First, Alden Tech is creating a foundation to support victims of abuse of power and technology. I would like you both to be on the board of directors. Richard handed over the first document. It would be a paid position with flexible hours. Your experience would be invaluable. Mark took the paper, surprised. This is unexpected. I'd have to consider how to balance it with my new job at the hospital. It's completely compatible, Richard assured him. The Foundation would only meet once a month. And what about me? Isabella asked, curious. I'm a minor. For you, Richard continued, handing her another document, an educational trust, full coverage of your studies from primary school to university, at any institution you choose. Isabella's eyes widened. That's a lot. It's the least I can do, Richard insisted. You saved my life twice, first on that street and then by showing me what my own creation had become. Mark looked at his daughter, moved. She deserves this and so much more. My Isabella has always been special. Isabella, still processing the offer, looked intently at Richard. There's one condition, she said finally. What's that? Richard asked, curious. I want to be actively involved in developing the Isabella Protocol. Not just lend my name, but help shape it. The streets taught me a lot about surveillance and security. I can contribute. Richard smiled, proud of the girl's maturity. Done. Greg will love working with you. The three of them sealed the deal with a handshake. As they left the room, they found Greg in the hallway, looking anxious. Richard, we need to talk. It's urgent. Something in Greg's tone made Richard quickly say goodbye to Mark and Isabella, promising to stay in touch and follow his friend into a private room. What's wrong? He asked as soon as the door closed. Greg typed quickly on his laptop, opening several command terminals. Remember that security protocol we implemented after rebuilding the system? The one that monitors for unauthorized access attempts? Yes, of course, and it was triggered. Someone tried to access Sentinel's core last night. Greg turned the screen to Richard. And it wasn't an amateur attempt. It was sophisticated, methodical, almost got past our security. Richard felt a knot in his stomach. George? I can't confirm, but the style, the methodology, it looks like his work. And there's more. Greg clicked on another file. The intruder left this on the server. A simple text message. The Phoenix rises from the ashes. Phoenix Protocol, Richard murmured, recalling an old conversation with his brother. It's what he called an automated recovery system we developed in the early years of Alden Tech. So he has a backup of the original Sentinel? Possibly. Or he's trying to recreate the system from fragments. Richard ran a hand over his face, tired. Just when we thought it was over. Greg closed the laptop. It's never really over, is it? Technology, once created, can't be uncreated. But it can be directed for good, Richard stated, determined. That's why Sentinel 2.0 is so important. We have to get it right this time. And what about George? Richard looked out the window, watching the city of Manchester stretch to the horizon, beautiful and complex. We remain vigilant. We strengthen our defenses, and we prepare for his next move. He turned to Greg. But today, at least for today, we celebrate our victories. The Isabella Protocol, the foundation, the rebuilding of the company. Greg nodded, respecting his friend's decision. Together, they left the room and headed to the main lobby, where a small celebration had been organized to mark the official launch of the Sentinel 2.0 pilot project. Employees, partners, and even a few invited journalists were waiting. Rachel was there, as were Mark and Isabella, who had decided to stay for the event. Michael had also arrived, brought by his mother, and ran to hug his father. Richard stepped onto the small makeshift stage, feeling the weight of the moment. He looked at the people gathered. His son, who had nearly witnessed his death. Greg, who had gone from adversary to crucial ally. Mark, who had suffered so much because of a technology created for good. Isabella, the unlikely hero who had saved so many lives with her courage. And Rachel, representing the justice and law essential to any functioning society. 4 months ago, Richard began, I believed I understood my own creation. I believed the Sentinel Project was a pure tool, destined only to protect and serve. I was wrong. The room fell silent, everyone attentive to his words. I learned the hard way that technology is not inherently good or bad. It is a mirror that reflects the intentions of those who control it. And when that control is concentrated in the wrong hands, even the noblest of creations can become a weapon. Richard paused, looking directly at Isabella. But I also learned that true security doesn't come from cameras or algorithms. It comes from brave people who refuse to accept injustice. People like Isabella Shaw, a girl who lived on the streets for 8 months, meticulously documenting a scheme that powerful adults were trying to hide. There was spontaneous applause for Isabella, who blushed deeply, hiding partially behind her father. Sentinel 2.0 is not just a technological evolution, Richard continued when the silence returned. It is a philosophical evolution, a system created not just to watch but to be watched, not just to protect citizens but to be protected by them. He gestured to the screen behind him, where the project's new logo shone, a stylized eye within a circle, representing surveillance, but surrounded by small connected dots, symbolizing the community. Today we begin a new journey, one where technology and humanity work together, where power and responsibility walk hand in hand. The Sentinel Project 2.0 is not perfect, no human creation is. But this time we are committed to transparency, ethics, and above all, the humility to acknowledge our mistakes. More applause followed as Richard stepped down from the stage to join Michael and his friends. The celebration continued, with lively conversations and cautious optimism about the future. In a quiet corner, Isabella observed everything with her perceptive eyes. She approached Richard as he was talking to some journalists. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked when he was free. "Of course," Richard replied, stepping away from the crowd. "What is it?" "Your speech was nice, but there's something you didn't say." "What's that?" Isabella looked around, making sure no one was listening. "Your brother is still out there, and he hasn't given up." Richard felt a chill. Isabella's intuition remained as sharp as ever. "How do you know that?" "Greg's expression when he called you over to talk. The way you looked out the window afterwards, as if you were looking for something. And most importantly," she pointed discreetly to a corner of the ceiling, "that specific camera has been rebooted 3 times in the last 10 minutes. It's being accessed remotely." Richard looked at the camera, both impressed and alarmed. "Greg!" he called, motioning for his friend to come over. He quickly explained what Isabella had noticed. "Impossible," Greg muttered, pulling out his tablet to check. "Our firewall should have—" "My God, she's right. The camera is streaming to an external server. He's watching us right now," Isabella concluded with surprising calm. "He wants to know what we're planning." Richard looked at the camera again, feeling as though he was staring directly at his brother. "Then let him watch," he decided, turning to Greg. "Don't cut the feed yet." "Are you sure?" Greg questioned. "Absolutely. Let him see what we've built. Let him understand that he's not just fighting me, but an entire community committed to truth and transparency." Isabella smiled, approving of the strategy. "And then?" "Then," Richard replied, determination in his voice, "we find him, wherever he's hiding." The girl nodded, satisfied with the answer. "I'll help," she declared simply, as if there were no other possibility. "We know you will," Greg confirmed with a small smile. The 3 of them returned to the celebration, now sharing a secret purpose. The battle against the misuse of Sentinel wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be completely. But now they weren't alone in this fight. Hours later, when the event finally ended and the guests began to disperse, Richard found Michael asleep on a sofa in the lobby. He lifted his son into his arms, remembering how light the boy was, even at 7 years old. "So small, so vulnerable, and yet so resilient. Need a hand?" Mark asked, approaching with Isabella. "I'm fine, thanks," Richard replied, adjusting Michael better in his arms. "He always falls asleep like this at events, ever since he was little." "Isabella was the same," Mark commented, smiling at his daughter. "She could sleep anywhere, anytime." "Not anymore, now that she's become a night owl. I have important things to do at night." Isabella defended herself with a half-smile. "Like spying on suspicious people from the apartment window," Mark teased, ruffling his daughter's hair. Richard watched the interaction with a wistful smile. Despite everything they had been through, the father and daughter maintained an affectionate and playful relationship. Survivors, both of them. "We're heading off," Mark announced. "Thanks for everything, Richard. The foundation, the educational trust, it means a lot." "It's the least I can do," Richard replied sincerely. Isabella stepped forward, extending her hand formally. "Partners in the Isabella Protocol?" Richard balanced Michael on one arm so he could shake the offered hand. "Partners in everything." After Mark and Isabella left, Richard carried Michael to the car where Greg was already waiting to take them home. The Manchester sky was beginning to darken, the first stars appearing timidly. "Home?" Greg asked, starting the engine. Richard looked at his sleeping son in the back seat, then at the Alden Tech building lit up against the night sky. "Yes, home," he confirmed. "Tomorrow is another day of rebuilding." As the car glided through the streets of the northern capital, Richard couldn't help but think how much his life had changed in just 4 months. He had lost faith in his brother and his partner, had almost lost his life, and had seen his creation twisted for dark purposes. But he had also gained unexpected allies, rediscovered his purpose, and perhaps most importantly, learned to see the world through the eyes of a girl who, against all odds, never stopped fighting for the truth. The Sentinel Project 2.0 would face challenges, no doubt. George was still out there planning his next move. Technology would continue to evolve, bringing new ethical dilemmas. The fight for privacy and security never truly ended. But for the first time since the attack on that rainy afternoon, Richard felt hopeful. With Michael, Greg, Rachel, Mark, and of course Isabella by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The true Sentinel, after all, was not an algorithm or a network of cameras, but the human spirit, vigilant and tireless in protecting what truly matters: truth, justice, and freedom. Meanwhile, in an undisclosed location, George Alden watched the final feed from the hacked camera before Greg finally disabled it. He had seen his brother, the boy, the detective, the former employee, and above all the girl, that irritating, cunning street kid who had started it all. "Enjoy your little victory," he muttered to the now dark screens. "The Phoenix Protocol is just beginning." His fingers danced across the keyboard, accessing servers scattered around the world. Fragments of the original Sentinel code, saved as a contingency before his fall, were now reorganizing into a new configuration, more subtle, harder to detect. The battle for the future of surveillance in Manchester, and perhaps across the UK, was far from over. In fact, it was just entering its most critical phase. And this time, George was prepared to go even further to achieve his vision of absolute control. What he didn't realize, however, was that he was no longer just facing his idealistic brother. He was facing a coalition forged in adversity, united by common principles, and above all, inspired by the tireless courage of a little girl who had learned to survive on the streets and was now learning to lead a technological revolution. The true Sentinel was vigilant, and her name was Isabella. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Richard, Michael, and Isabella has touched your hearts. The Sentinel Project reminds us that technology is only as good as the intentions of those who control it, and that true vigilance must come from society, attentive and engaged. To continue this journey through the fascinating world where technology and humanity meet, we've prepared a special playlist with equally compelling stories. Find it by clicking here on the left. If you were moved by Isabella's courage and Richard's redemption, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and tell us which city you're following this narrative from. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexities of modern life, the ethical dilemmas of technology, and the transformative power of human courage. Let us know in the comments which character touched your heart the most and what kind of story you'd like to hear in our next broadcast. Your opinion is essential for us to continue creating content that moves, inspires, and makes you think. Until our next meeting, where new adventures and reflections await,